Hey, it's Ben, and this is Drambo by BeepStreet. This video is going to be about a granular sampler that you can build or that you can download from patch storage. I'm calling it grain slices. It's already there in patch storage called grain slices, so you don't have to build it. But I think it's really fun. It's something I wasn't able to do before, and I figured out how to do it. So I'm going to walk through how to use this rack, and then I'll talk a little bit about how it's built. So it lets you take a sample like this. Won't play the whole thing. Because I Love You by Lenny Williams. Old soul sample. And using a couple different flexies and some other tricks, make really cool atmospheric textures from whatever your sample is that I think very much gets to like a granular sound. So the setup that I have here, the controls that you have, you actually have 8 different flexi samplers, and the reason that is that any one instrument, especially the samplers in Drambo, only have 8 voices of polyphony. And here I'm going to treat the voices as actual grains. So that means you would only get 8 grains, which isn't really, doesn't get you the density that you want in many cases. So I said 64 grains, that'll probably do it. So I have 8 flexis. That does mean you have to load 8 samples in. You have to load a sample into each flexi. That's not that bad. You can load a sample into one and then swipe down and copy. And then you can swipe down on other flexis and paste. So it really doesn't take that long. So you have your regular flexi controls, which I don't really touch. And we can just hide that. So what I wanted to be able to do is I wanted to do that granular like sampling synthesis almost across different points in the sample. So now I have a start point control. So I can almost like scrub through, find cool points in the sample that are almost like frozen. Sounds really cool on voices. That's enough for now. So I have like, if I wanted, I have 32 slices or points in the sample. And then, especially for long samples, you can dial it in with your fine controls. Just open up the fine control and raise the scale for the fine up a little bit. Just making it active basically. So now, it's a lot finer. And I can make this even smaller if I wanted. I can't do that with my mouse. So I just love that like freezing effect. And I think it's cool that we can now do that over a whole sample and select different areas. So now I'm going to go and hide this section. I don't need to see it. So your grain controls, you get a density control. You're going to see that it's really an oscillator. So this is actually, it is an oscillator, and it's generating pulses basically, and that's generating MIDI notes that are then being distributed to the actual flexi samplers. And so you can get really short. You can just hear the sample. You have attack and decay settings for like it's an amp envelope, but it's acting as our like sample window. Crank this back up. So you have this window or envelope to kind of like smooth or unsmooth your sample. I like to leave it right around there for the attack and decay. And then in addition to setting like your sample start with the slices control, you can also use these LFOs. So I'm going to turn it down so there's no LFO. This is the same exact point in all of the 8 flexies that's being triggered. And so it's a little bit harsh to me. It's not bad, but it's a little bit harsh. So 2 things. You have an LFO that's going to scrub through the start point. And that LFO is being modulated by another LFO because it sounds better to me when there's some like dynamic changes going on versus just like the same change all the time. So it's going to go through I almost get like string sounds like phasing here. And so you're going to see this LFO is actually set to no amount, but its amount is being modulated by this LFO. Just mess around with different combinations. I'm going to bring this back down. Sure. And then sample spread is more of like a random, the offset of each flexi, the start point of each flexi sampler, is being randomly changed for each voice that gets triggered. And remember, here the voices are grains. So it's just a little bit of randomness. Really opens things up. You don't get that weird phasing as much. And it sounds more of like a cloud, like frozen kind of sound. Then you have the samplers, obviously. And I don't really touch these controls at all after I have the sample in there. You could mess around with it. You could have different samples loaded into each flexi slot, doesn't matter. But the only like modulation I'm doing is on offset, which is the start point of the sample. You'll see it move. Okay, so I'm going to try and get this right. Instrument is the offset coming from the slice controls. Scale is coming from it's like the random notes that are being generated, which you control with sample spread. And then sample LFO is coming from sample LFO. And it's the exact same modulation happening, or same controls rather, for each flexi. When you open this up, you'll see that there are some modules that are contained in front of each flexi sampler. And that's how you're able to get all of the voices. So then after that, got some effects. If you want to use these, you could add some delay or a little bit of reverb. If you wanted a filter, might sound good. And then after all that, I do have an envelope that I'm using. Sounds cool if you... No, probably should turn the envelope off. I don't know. It's really fun. The only downside right now, the big downside for me, is that it doesn't work polyphonically. Something with the slice control gets jumbled. So you can only do this with one part of the sample at a time, one voice. But I'm having a blast with it. I really like these kinds of sounds, and now I can use this method within Drambo. So that's cool. Now I'm going to walk through how the patch works. Stop watching if you're not interested. Stick around if you are. If you have any questions about this or suggestions, say something in the comments or comment on the patch storage. So let's expand it, and we're going to see all the craziness that's going on. Okay, there is a README at the beginning, so if you want to go through that on your own, basically gives instructions. So here, this is like the main part of the instrument. So in the sampler section, there's one layer rack, and there are 8 layers. Each layer has its own flexi sampler, its own envelope, and then most importantly, its own MIDI to CV module. And each of these has 8 voices. The way you're able to get 64 grains out of this is back here are MIDI note generators, which are generating notes from an oscillator. And that MIDI note generator is going into one MIDI to poly module. That MIDI to poly module is being used to split up the first round of MIDI notes that are generated from the oscillator, and they're being distributed to 2 MIDI mixers. So half of the notes that come into this MIDI to poly module are going to one MIDI mixer, half are going to another. And then that MIDI mixer, or each MIDI mixer, is going into another MIDI to poly module. And if you're doing your math, you're going to see that that is 8 available different MIDI notes, or like MIDI routes, that are being distributed between these 2 MIDI to poly modules. And the first column of samplers are getting its MIDI from one MIDI module, MIDI to poly module, and the other column is getting its signal from this MIDI to poly module. So, you know, you're generating a lot of MIDI notes at a high frequency. That's generating a bunch of MIDI notes, up to 64, that are being distributed for over your 8 different MIDI to CV modules. And that's going in to the flexi samplers. And then that's where the random offset modulation comes from. So for each note, each grain that's generated, it can have its a random offset position, and you can modulate the amount of randomness using a scale, using the same scale control, and that blocks how much random is going into each offset. The sample LFO is just a global control, so all of the flexes are kind of scrubbing through the offset the same way. All of the amp envelopes are like they're individual per the flexi that they're assigned to, but you get sort of macro control. And I like to use a knob going through a graphic shaper, because you can set exactly what range you want the knob to control. And if you want it to start from 0 or from -1 or wherever, we'll bring this back. And now you can snap in your values in the graphic shaper, so that's nice. So you have 3 like macro controls: attack, decay, sample spread. The actual control you're using is just a knob that's being routed through a shaper, and then each point where you need it in the actual instrument is being modulated by those modules. So that's a lot of talking, but I wanted to walk through, exactly what's going on. At the very end, you have one envelope that is being controlled by your original like MIDI to CV on the track. So it's just one trigger, one envelope for the whole instrument. Because remember, these are being treated as basically individual voices. So you get 64 voices, but we're using them as grains here. So we kind of just want one global envelope. All right, again, if you have any questions, let me know either here in YouTube or at Pet Storage, or come down to the BeepStreet forum and you can ask questions and share cool things that you're doing in Drambo. All right, have fun.